Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we will be continuing our anatomy journey and moving downwards from the skull, which is logically we'll be going down to the spine, talking about all the vertebrae of the spine, talking about the sacrum and the coccyx, as well as the intervertebral discs and the ligaments that bind the spine together. Now, it's a very broad topic. It's a topic that has a lot of minor details. It is not a difficult topic at all, not whatsoever. However, it is very broad and very dense. I will have to go through it very quickly, so I will be speaking very, very fast, as you can probably guess from the intro. It's okay if you guys can keep up, that's great, amazing. If not, that's fine. Just lower the speed of the video and take it at your own time. And just the main idea is just understand everything that's going on. Now, let's start off with the spine. The spine as a whole is composed of 33 vertebra, and these vertebra are numbered rather than named, and they are classified according to the region where they are present. Now, in the region of your neck, we have the 7 cervical vertebra. In the region of your chest, we have the 12 thoracic. In the region of your lower back, we have the 5 lumbar. In the region of your pelvis, your pelvic region, we have the sacrum, which is formed of 5 fused vertebra, and the coccyx, which is your tailbone, which is formed by 4 fused vertebra. Now, I know the word coccyx sounds very dirty, but I did not make that up. It is what it's called. Now, at the region or where the fifth lumbar vertebra and the sacrum bind, we have the lumbosacral angle. It is a, let's say, landmark that you must know about. As you can see here in this image, the anterior view image, you can see that the body or the size of the vertebra in general increases as we go down. Why does that happen? The size increases because as we move down from the top to the bottom, the weight the weight increases, the bearing of the weight on the vertebra increases. So that means that the vertebra has to accommodate for the required weight that is being put on it. So that's why the lumbar vertebra or your lower back region has the thickest bodies of vertebra, or the largest vertebrae generally speaking, and the neck has the smallest because it only has to carry your head. So in comparison to your head and your whole body, head is a lot lighter, logically. Now, there's another thing that you guys can also notice if you look at it as a whole from a distance. You can see that there are some sort of bends. These bends are known as curvatures. The curvatures are split into two types, the kyphosis and the lordosis. And yes, these are both diseases, but the spelling is different. The kyphosis, which is Kyphoses instead of SIS, has is the curvatures of the thorax and the sacrum, or the thoracic curvature and the sacral curvature, also known as the pelvic curvature, which is understandable. These all are concave anteriorly. Now, concave anteriorly, which means on the anterior view, in this view, you can see that the thoracic and sacral are both concave. See, right here, the thoracic is concave anteriorly, and the sacrum is concave anteriorly as well. This is the posterior region, so it's convex posteriorly or concave anteriorly. You can pick one, either concave or convex, and you can move it with all of the curvatures. For example, now when we go into the cervical and lumbar curvatures, also known as the lordosis, L-O-R-D-E-S, L-O-R-D-O-S-E-S, the lordosis are concave posteriorly. So, see the cervical, it is concave posteriorly, where the spine of the vertebra is present. That is where it's concave. That is for the cervical and lumbar. Now, cervical and lumbar, but these curvatures are also known as secondary curvatures. These curvatures happen when the human being, or when the child or the infant begins to lift its head up, you get the cervical curvature. And when the child begins to walk, you get the lumbar curvature. So they are not the primary curvatures like the thoracic and sacral, because the thoracic and sacral are there from birth. Now, all the vertebra differ in their own specific characteristics. They're all unique in one way or another, because according to their region where they are located, they have different necessities in order to take out certain functions. So, however, there are some uh, However, there are some parts of the vertebra that in all of the vertebra are the same. They do not differ. These are the basic characteristics that are present in all vertebra. These include two major parts, the body and the vertebral arch. Now, the body, as you can see here, is this large dense part. This is the weight bearing part of the vertebra. You can see that this region where the it is a bit lighter than the darker core. This is called the epiphyseal rim. Now, in general, the whole body, as a whole thing, the whole body of the vertebra is covered with cartilage in normal cases, not as a bone. Not when you cut it open. Uh, However, this whiter area, it's more of a smooth bone than the dense core of it, and it is known as the epiphyseal rim. That's all I want you to know. Epiphyseal rim. Now, the vertebral arch. If you were to draw a horizontal, imagine a horizontal line right beyond the body, right here at the border of the body, you will split this into two sides. The vertebral arch, which is all of this, and the vertebral body, which is what we just described. Now, between the vertebral body and the vertebral arch, when you bind them together, you get the vertebral foramina. And a bunch of vertebral foramina stacked upon each other give you the vertebral canal, and that is the region where your spinal cord passes. So that is the region which is very necessary for it to be perfect so that the spinal cord can pass through it without causing any nervous damage, for example. Now, the vertebral arch is has projections from it. It has the pedicles and it has the lamina. The pedicles project directly posterior from the body, as you can see here. They go right back, and the lamina meets them on either side to form a complete circle or complete enclosing of the spinal cord. And failure for the lamina to enclose on the pedicles causes a genetic disease or fetal genetic sorry, not genetic, causes a developmental disease in the fetus, which we can get to later. Now, moving on to the projections from the vertebral arch. Projections from the vertebral arch include the spinous process, the transverse process, or one spinous process, two transverse processes, and four articular processes. The articular processes are the processes or the regions where the vertebra bind to the vertebra above and below it. Now, the two bones on themselves do not ever, the two bodies, sorry, do not ever bind on each other. Because if two thick bones like the vertebral bodies were to bind together, then they would fuse, and that would cause no sort of mobility whatsoever towards your back, which is very, let's say, unwanted. Because if you cannot move your back, then that is not good at all. It's disease known as bamboo spine, and it is a type of degenerative disc diseases. Now, for the four articular processes, they are split into two: the two superior articular processes and the two inferior articular processes. As you can see here, these are the articular processes, the inferior and articular processes, and facets. The process is the region, this is the projection, the facet is the area where the binding actually happens. As you can see here from another view, you have the anterior articular facet, and here you have the superior articular facet, and the lamina and pedicles as we described. Now, one more thing that I want to mention is that we have something known as the vertebral notches. Vertebral notches are two types again: superior vertebral notch and inferior vertebral notch. Now, they might not amount to much as you take as a single vertebra. However, if you put them on each other, again, the inferior and superior vertebral notch, this is the inferior vertebral notch of the superior vertebra, and this is the superior vertebral notch of the inferior vertebra, form the intervertebral foramen, which here says as the red outline. The intervertebral foramen is a necessity for the spinal roots, which, okay, well, you have your spinal cord, great. The spinal cord, we said, goes through the vertebral foramen, which is perfect, or vertebral canal. But how do nerves come into and go out of the spinal cord? That is where the intervertebral foramen comes in. The intervertebral foramen is the region or the space where the spinal roots can enter and exit the spine wherever they please and however they want. And that is, as you can see, it is exactly posterior to the intervertebral disc, and that is important, and I will tell you why in a second. The intervertebral disc, which is a disc that separates the vertebral bodies from each other so they do not fuse and they allow some limit of flexibility, is composed of two major parts: the nucleus pulposus and the annulus fibrosus. The nucleus pulposus is the inside jelly-like structure, and the annulus fibrosus, as you can see here, is the border of the nucleus pulposus. Now, the nucleus pulposus is the region which is mostly compact. It is the nucleus pulposus is the region which is anti-shock. For example, any shocks that go if you jump from a relatively high region, which does not cause your death, so do not go jumping from the 12th-story building. If you jump from a few feet above and jump on the floor, there would be a shock traveling from your leg, from your feet to your legs to your spine. Now, if it was only the vertebral bodies, imagine with me, if it was only vertebral bodies stacked upon each other, that shock from its strength would crush your bones, crush your vertebra, and then cause neurological damage. So, the nucleus pulposus is a shock absorbent. It prevents the bodies of this vertebra from collapsing together and causing damage. Now, the annulus fibrosus, on the other hand, is less of a jelly-like structure. It is more rigid, it is more strong, it is more tough because it needs to keep the nucleus pulposus in place. It is like the parent that has to be strict with its child. It cannot allow it to move outside or inside because, like we said, the nucleus pulposus is a very jelly-like structure. It is sort of like an implant, if you may. So if it moves, however, if it wants, then it will eventually be squeezed out from between the bodies and then affect or damage the spine, damage, sorry, the spinal cord, or go wherever it may go. Now, moving on to another thing that is important, the ligaments of the spine. The ligaments of the spine are things that, whether you believe it or not, keep stuff like the disc in place wherever necessary. Now, look with me here for a second. Here we have the anterior longitudinal ligament, the posterior longitudinal ligament, the interspinous ligament, and the ligaments inflavum. There's another image below, but for the sake of this, I want to use this image. This purple thing right here, this is the disc. Now, in a disc herniation, where the disc herniates outside or in between two of the vertebral bodies, it never, ever herniates anteriorly. Why? Because of the anterior longitudinal ligament. Now, why does the anterior? What does that mean? How does that help us? Why does that matter to me? Because the anterior longitudinal ligament is very broad, it is very tough, and is very thick. It cannot physically move forward, push outside or through the anterior longitudinal ligament. However, if you look to the back, to the posterior longitudinal ligament, you can see that it's much more thin. It is much more flexible. It allows the intervertebral disc to slip from right here. And that is why when the intervertebral disc, or when somebody has a disc herniation, the intervertebral disc slips towards the posterior longitudinal ligament and compresses the spinal root, which causes immense severe pain at that region. Now, the interspinous ligament, as you can guess, is between the spines of the vertebra, the spinous process of the vertebra, and the ligamentum flavum, right here, one second, ligamentum flavum, which is the light blue one in this image, is between the lamina of the vertebra, right? And the interspinal ligament is between the spines, and the supraspinous runs along the posterior part of every spinous process of the vertebra. So it's like it is a long line that runs on the back of the vertebra, and we have the anterior ligament which runs on the anterior region on the bodies of the vertebra. And that is all these are all the ligaments that are important for now.